Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to start looking at form design in Microsoft Access. Again, we have our 4 tables in the application, and each of them will probably need at least one form of some kind or another so that we can enter data into them. And as you can see here, I've added a few fields to the authors table. Now we have not only the author's name, but also their biography, the year they were born and perhaps the year they died, the website, and a picture if it's available. So the first form that we're going to do is a really simple form to enter information into the authors table, whether it's to enter new authors or whether it's to update information on existing authors. You need a way to do both. So let's come up here to the Create tab and go to Form Wizard. Now the Form Wizard is a quick way to create new forms, and it will do a lot of work for you right away. It won't meet all your needs, as you're about to see, but it probably will save you a lot of time. So let's click on Form Wizard. TBL Authors is already chosen as the first one in the list. It shows the available fields and the fields that we're going to include in the form. And for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and select everything. We can click this second button to select all fields. Then I'm going to click Next, and it offers you a selection of various formats. In this case, I'm going to use columnar. You could also use tabular, in which case it would arrange the fields differently, and you can look at each one of those. I encourage you to explore those different options, but I'll stick with columns right now. Click Next. Then we can set the title, and we'll say Authors Form, and I want to modify the form's design, and click Finish. And it's gone ahead and created the form and saved it. So let me go ahead and close this first of all, and let's rename this. And again, I'm using that little 3-letter prefix to indicate that it's a form. And let's reopen that in Design View. So now you see that it's created the form and it's included all the fields that were selected in the wizard, and it's laid out actual form controls. It's added labels for them and form edit controls. And if we look at this in form view, we can see that it actually does show the data. And down here you have the navigation bar where you can scroll through the various records and see them one after another. There's not a lot of data, there's just the author name there, but it's showing each one of them. And you can go to the last one, you can go to the first, you can create a new one. And again, this is the primary key, so it's not showing an actual value right now, but if I was to add a new author, then it would actually go ahead and fill in the primary key, just as it does in the table view. So it's created a very basic form, and depending on how sophisticated you want your application to be, this might be all you'd need, but probably not. We really should do some refinements on this and make it a little bit easier to work with and a little bit more attractive. So let's go to the design view and see what some of the options are that we can use to do that. So here we have the design view, and up here at the top you can see there are 3 tabs. You have the design tab where you can switch between the form view and the design view, and there's a third called layout view, which is kind of a limited editing environment. You have themes and colors. You have the various controls that you can add to the form. You have some other control options. You can insert charts, a logo, set the title. You can add existing fields where you can view the fields that are available in the table that the form is referencing. You can see the property sheet again, and then you have the Arrange tab, which helps you arrange the controls, align them, and so on. And then you have the Format tab, which is basically the same as formatting a document. You can set the fonts, the size, you can set a background image for the form if you want to get fancy, and you can do a lot of different things. So it's a pretty powerful form design environment that you can use to create pretty much any data entry form that you want. Now here we have the property sheet, and this is the area, again, just like with the table and the queries, where you can set the various properties available for the form. And it's important to remember that when you're working with the form, there are actually two regions that you're working with. You have the display area that contains all the controls and features the properties that can be set for those. And then you have the form itself. These big gray areas here are the form that contains the display area and all the properties available for the form as an object within the database. So you can see that it has quite a few more properties than the display area, and it can be easy to get intimidated by all these different properties, but it's important to understand that this actually gives you quite a bit of power. You don't have to know them all at once, you don't have to get buried in them, but if you start with a few key properties and just take your time and get to know some of the different properties available, you'll find that you really have quite a bit of power when it comes to designing the forms that you need in order to automate your processes. So let's take a look at a few of these. Again, working with the form itself, and up here at the top of the property sheet you can actually select which object you're working with. If I select detail, it goes back to the detail, but I want to work with the form right now. And the first property that we should look at is the record source. Every form or report has a record source where it actually gets the data, and in this case it's using the TBL authors table. It's going directly to the table, which might not always be what we want to do. Sometimes we can use a query instead. We can create a query based on the table and let the form go through that, which might be a better idea, and that's something that we'll look at more later. But right now, just for this simple form, it's going directly off the authors table. So it's pulling the data for each one of these fields from that table. We also have the caption. You can see that when we actually go into form view, it shows the forum title. As a way to explain some of these, let me just go through and make a few changes that I usually use for my own forms. I'm going to come down here and click on border style. We can actually change the border style, and I'm going to leave that as thin so that when I open that in view, you can see it's kind of changed the border. It's not sizable anymore. It's changed it to a thin border. Sometimes that's useful. I'm going to remove the record selectors, and what that is this little bar right here. You can select an entire record and you can copy it or paste it elsewhere. I don't usually use those, so I'm going to remove that, and now you can see that's gone. Navigation buttons, yes, we want those. Again, that's the navigation bar that you saw earlier. If I were to remove that, those would be gone and you would not be able to page through the records. So it's best to leave those on, at least on this type of form. The scroll bars, you can decide whether or not you want to leave those on. And in this case, we're not actually seeing them. If I was to change the border style back to sizable, then you could see those come into play. But I'm going to remove those. The control box and close button have to do with these controls, and you can decide whether you want those on your form. If you were to remove the close button, you would need another way of closing the form, to maybe a command button down here, and we'll look at command buttons later on. Min and max buttons, those are the minimization and maximizing buttons that you usually see on forms. If we disable those, then you can see that you can't change the form size anymore. And in some cases that might be useful. I'll leave those on. And the rest of these can stay as they are for now. Let me take a quick look at the different categories. You have the format settings, which you just saw. You have the data settings, which has to do with, again, the record source and how it's handling the data, whether it's ordered by a specific field or whether it's filtered on a specific field. The event properties have to do with coding and macros that we saw in an earlier lesson. Access is very much event driven. It depends on user and program events to carry out various actions. So you can actually use these events to program various responses into your forums, which enable you to automate your processes and carry out the actions that you need. And it can actually enable you to create your own application that looks very much like any other Windows application. But again, that's an advanced subject that we'll get into a little bit more later, so there's no need to worry about that right now. Then you have some miscellaneous forums, such as the toolbar, the menu bar, and a couple of other things that we can get into later. So that's the general environment that you'll use to create an access form for your data. And in the next lesson, we'll look at how we can customize some of these fields and look at some of the controls that are available to you for working with your data.